Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm K.R. Davidson. Today we are discussing the Alek Minassian trial. April 23, 2018 will be etched in the Canadian psyche as the day Alek Minassian, a radicalized member of the incel movement, turned a rental van into a killing machine on the streets of Toronto. In broad daylight and across several downtown city blocks, Minassian intentionally drove the rented van onto city sidewalks, striking dozens of helpless pedestrians. The attack shocked the nation. With 10 people killed and 16 people injured, this case is the deadliest homicide in Canada involving a motor vehicle. The case is now concluding, and oddly enough, the issue at trial is not whether Minassian committed the egregious act. The case comes down to whether or not Minassian is criminally responsible, a question that looks at whether a disease of the mind rendered him incapable of knowing that the act that he committed is wrong. Minassian's defense team is advancing the novel legal argument that his condition of autism should establish him as not criminally responsible. With us to discuss this controversial and novel defense is Cynthia Fromstein and Ian Scott, who both serve as alternate chairs of the Ontario Review Board, and Anita Zaghetti, the president of the Law and Mental Disorder Association. So, Mr. Scott and Ms. Fromstein, just for the purpose of the viewers, I understand that you serve as alternate chairs, but you're not here speaking on behalf of the Review Board, just for the purpose of our audience's understanding. But, Mr. Scott, if you can give us an understanding of how the trial in this matter has unfolded and bring our viewers through a bit of the understanding in that area.
Well, as you indicated, Mr. Davidson, the trial's very quickly focused on the issue of the defense of not criminally responsible, which makes it unusual in terms of trials of this nature in the sense that there are no facts at issue. All parties agree that Mr. Minassian did physically what he did that day. And really the only issue is whether the judge is going to find Mr. Minassian not criminally responsible for all of these alleged incidents. And in fact, even within the area of NCR, as we call it, Section 16 of the Criminal Code, there are a number of things that are not an issue. It's not an issue that it was planned or deliberate. It's really boiling down to whether or not he had a major mental disorder which caused him to not understand that what he did was morally wrong. So the way the trial plays out at this point is it's, and this is quite unusual, again, for a criminal trial, there's a reverse onus going on. It's up to the defense to satisfy the court on a balance of probabilities that he's NCR in these circumstances. So that kind of affects the witness order as well. It means that the defense is going to be calling its experts before the Crown, if the Crown chooses to call experts, and indeed in this case they are. They've called a psychiatrist and a psychologist to, in essence, rebut the position that there's a not criminally responsible defense. So all that evidence is played out, the examination, the cross-examination, and we're now up to final submissions. And then I presume the judge will take a break and decide. And really, at the end of the day, the issue is going to be, is he guilty of all these offenses in law, in which case he will be sentenced to a number of counts of first-degree murder, no chance of parole for 25 years, and probably will spend the rest of his life in jail. Or alternatively, is he not criminally responsible, in which case he goes into the mental health process, which we can talk about a little more later.
Sure. So, Ms. Fromstein, I know that you've been following this closely. With the experts here, what are some of the more interesting issues that you've reviewed with your background in this area?
Well, I mean, I have to say, at the outset of the trial, before it began, I would have thought, and my view was that the Crown had a very strong case. Dr. Bradford, a renowned forensic psychiatrist, called by the defense, set out that his experience and his view on this matter was that someone needs to have a psychotic break, that there needs to be a psychosis for them to get to the point where they meet an NCR defense. But he had the wisdom and the expertise to also say he's not an expert in autism. And and that there might be other views.
I'm going to let you pick up what is captured in this area. We're going to go to a commercial break in a minute, and we'll continue to unpack some of the specifics of this case. Welcome back to Canadian Justice. We're here with our panel of experts talking about the Alek Minassian trial. Ms. Fromstein, right before the break, I had to cut you short. You were talking about the expert that was called by the defense. I think it was Mr. Bradford, Dr. Bradford. If you can pick up where you left off, that would be great.
So we've heard from an expert, Dr. Westphal, who is, I think everyone would agree, the person with the most experience and an incredible background with respect to autism spectrum disorder. And his position is that Mr. Minassian didn't have the capacity, because of his disorder, to make a rational decision as to whether his acts were morally wrong. So it's novel. It's not something that's ever come before me as a chair of the review board. I also practice and have represented people on NCR defenses. And so, it brings out a whole novel area. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this case. And it's broadened, no matter what the decision, I think it's already broadened the law on criminal responsibility.
Very interesting, because I think at the heart of it, we're seeing that autism in and of itself is being examined, of whether it can cause whether it's a mental disorder that causes this break with reality. Ms. Seghetti, what are you hearing out there from the autism community on how they're responding to this assertion that's being brought forward by Mr. Minassian's defense team?
Thank you for that question. At least initially, the voices on behalf of persons and the families of those with autism spectrum diagnoses, I think we're quite troubled by this notion of autism being advanced as the basis for an NCR finding. I think the concern was that the public would draw any connection between autism and violence, or between autism and NCR. Embedded in that is already a bit of stereotyping about being found NCR, because I think the underlying thinking is that there's a big stigma around absence of criminal responsibility and a big stigma around mental disorder. So I think there were a lot of concerns, and it was inflammatory. People were quite outraged that autism would be linked to an absence of criminal responsibility, and ultimately to a very violent and very heinous act such as the offenses here. But hopefully over time, as the evidence has come in, those concerns have been allayed, because even Dr. Westphal, who was the star witness for the defense, was very clear at the outset of his testimony that nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that autism equates to violence, or that autism equates to an absence of criminal responsibility. In fact, the evidence is quite to the contrary. The evidence is about the complex nature of autism. There's been a lot of education I think we've all had through this trial about just how nuanced and sophisticated and complex the varying presentations of autism spectrum disorders may be. So hopefully those concerns have been allayed, and I think that we're receiving a service in that regard with the amount of expert evidence that we've had in this trial about the nature of autism. So at the end of the day, if autism is found to be a basis for an NCR defense, I don't think that that's problematic for anyone. I think it would just be the way in which our common laws naturally evolve.
Very interesting, specifically because the evolution of the common law comes from the Monaghan case in England, and so we're at an interesting part in examining this issue here. Mr. Scott, we're going to be going to a commercial break in about 30 or 40 seconds, but if you can just start us out on, from all the facts that you've heard so far, what is your understanding? Do you think that the defense has put together something that will be a successful argument in this area, or do you think that the Crown's arguments are stronger?
Well, maybe reflecting my past here, but I must say that I'm not convinced that this will be a successful defense. for a number of reasons. First is there are eminent experts, Ontario Canadian experts, who have said quite the contrary, that being Dr. Bradford and Dr. Woodside, and also the psychologist who did the examinations, Dr. Percy Wright. We're all familiar with these individuals. They've testified in front of the board many times, and at least Dr. Bradford sat on the board. These are really the top Canadian experts, and collectively they said it doesn't add up to NCR.
I'm gonna actually let you carry on your thoughts when we come back after these commercial messages, because I want to give you ample time to be able to finish that. So please stay with us. We're going to be back after these messages. Welcome back to Canadian Justice. We're here with our panel of experts talking about the Alek Minassian trial. Mr. Scott, you were giving the viewers your understanding of the facts and the evidence heard to date, and what you think that the position would be. If you can just carry on with your commentary, please.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the trial how ultimately Dr. Westphal came forward, the American expert. As far as I can see, because Dr. Bradford was actually called by the defense, and indeed I presume was retained by the defense to examine Mr. Minassian. And quite rightly, Dr. Bradford said, look, I don't have all the experience and expertise in the area of autism spectrum disorder, and recommended that indeed the defense talk to Dr. Westphal in the U.S. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Westphal is a couple of things. First of all, he ultimately never said that he's of the view that he's NCR. Perhaps rightly so, because this is a legal decision, not a medical one. But what was interesting to me was how it played out in terms of the cross-examination of Dr. Westphal, in the sense that there was a bit of a fight over a series of videotapes that Dr. Westphal took in the interviews with Mr. Minassian. And indeed, he did not want them released. Ultimately, the judge felt she had no choice but to say they were going to be released under sealing order. But there are aspects in those tapes which would indicate very strongly that he doesn't have NCR, in the sense that he does have a sense of the appreciation of the moral outrage of what he did. And they were not included in the conclusions of Dr. Westphal's report. So, I mean, to some degree, this is going to play out a bit, I think, on the way the experts are cross-examined. And at least, you know, I didn't watch the trial, but I was trying to follow as careful as I could in the paper. It looks to me like there were some significant blows to the position that Dr. Westphal took.
Okay.
And I didn't see the blows when you looked at the Dr. Bradford or Dr. Woodside when they gave their evidence.
Very, very, very interesting. Now, I know, Ms. Fromstein, you had talked in the first segment how your view on this has shifted during the trial. Can you just give us an understanding of how that has changed and what your view is now on what you think the outcome will be?
It's very complex, and it's, you know, and I've learned a lot listening, and I've been watching the evidence as much as possible. What Dr. Westphal's position is that even though Mr. Minassian, who has a strong intellect, understands and has learned the rules, you know, the rules that this is wrong, that he, because of his deficits, doesn't have the capacity to make a rational choice and to be able to analyze his choices in a rational way. And I think he has made a very strong argument for that. I don't agree with Mr. Scott on that. And my view has shifted. I started off thinking you're going to have to be psychotic to have that break in reality. But I think it has opened it up. And yesterday, at the outset of the defense submissions, the Crown was asked by the judge, do you agree at this point, are we going to argue that there may be an avenue to an NCR through autism spectrum disorder? And the Crown conceded that. So it's going to boil down to this specific case. And if the judge finds in this specific case that he didn't have that capacity, and I'm glad it's in the hands of someone as competent and as Justice Malloy.
Sure. And Ms. Szigeti, we're going to be going over to commercial in a minute, but if you might start us off, and we'll give you time after the messages to finish your thoughts. So.
Okay. So if Mr. Scott had been a Crown in his former life, I'm a defense lawyer, so I think the defense is doing great. I'm with Ms. Fromstein in that it wasn't just me or Ms. Fromstein. I think it was every forensic psychiatrist and lawyer initially thought this is an uphill battle that the defense cannot overcome. But I think that Boris Butensky has done an outstanding job here where if there's any chance that he's put his best foot forward and left no stone unturned for Mr. Minassian. So there's a chance.
Wow, that's very interesting, because I think a lot of the papers and that had echoed the sentiment that at the onset that this was the epitome of an uphill battle for the defense team. But as we're hearing, there's a shift, and I think that there's a real question of the challenges that the judge will have to weigh in making the decision. We're going to be going over commercial messages. We'll come back to unpack this in a little bit more fulsome way after these messages. Stay with us. Welcome back to Canadian Justice. We're here with our panel of experts talking about the Alek Minassian trial. Mr. Scott, can you give the Canadian viewers an understanding of what actually happens if Mr. Minassian is found not criminally responsible in this trial?
Well, it's certainly not a get out of jail free card. What happens is he is now under the jurisdiction of the Ontario Review Board, where there will be an initial hearing to decide, in essence, for Mr. Minassian, where he will be placed in the system. And from then on, he will have an annual hearing once a year to really determine the ultimate issue here, which is, does he continue to represent a significant risk to the safety of the public? And he will be represented by counsel. Ms. Szigeti, in many instances, represents many people before the board. And that issue will be really the major issue of the board, is whether or not this person continues to represent a significant risk, and what should be the terms and conditions if he indeed does remain a significant risk. The others can expand on some of these other issues.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Ms. Fromstein, you sit on the board. You have to review cases like this, and obviously the Alek Minassian facts are extremely challenging. In this instance, would you think somebody like Alek Minassian might be permitted to leave an institution in short order, or what is your view if he is found at NCR?
Well, I don't think there'll be any difficulty in finding him to be a significant threat to the safety of the public. He's stated in his interviews with the experts that, he would potentially do this again. So there, his disconnect is remarkable with what he has done. The board's role in determining what conditions are necessary and appropriate at an annual hearing have to put public safety as its primary goal. So if you give primacy to public safety, then you must create a disposition that is the least onerous and least restrictive. But on the basis of public safety, I expect he will be in an institution for a very, very long time. So,
Ms. Szigeti, you represent individuals before the board all the time on this issue. What are some of the longer institutionalized cases that you've seen? How long can people be required to stay in an institution? I mean, we're just closing off in 1 minute here. So,
I wish I could answer how long. So that's the difficulty with NCR, is it is in fact indefinite detention, and it can be restricted to a very secure psychiatric facility. I have clients who've been in for 40 years at Waypoint, the maximum security, and they will die there. So I don't think anyone should worry that this is a very cushy kind of alternative to jail. It's not dissimilar in some ways. And I will mention, not specific to this case necessarily, but you can also be designated now a high-risk accused, which is sort of a dangerous offender equivalent in mental disorder. and then you don't get any privileges. You don't get to go outside on your own, and you may not be reviewed annually either. So there's always that option for an incredibly secure detention that's indefinite.
I want to thank each of you for coming on the show and just giving our viewers a much better appreciation of this understanding of not being criminally responsible. Thanks so much. At the heart of this case is the question of whether Alek Minassian suffered a break from reality and, as such, did not have an appreciation of his actions. It is difficult to comprehend that so many lives can be lost and that someone may not be held accountable for their actions. On the other hand, the fundamental components of our criminal law requires that we must be able to establish that a person committing a crime intended to do so. The bedrock case that established this defense in England, Lord Chief Justice Tyndale captured the essence of the issue when he stated, "The question to be determined is whether at the time of the act was committed, the prisoner knew that he was doing a wrong or wicked act." The defense in the Minassian trial has advanced that autism in and of itself constituted a disease of the mind that did not permit Alek Minassian from comprehending the actions he did. The Crown Attorney's position is that this was a calculated attack, and as such, Alek Minassian knew that the attack was wrong. What do you think? You be the judge. Let us know your thoughts on our social media platforms and exercise your ability to speak on issues important to Canadians. I'm K.R. Davidson. Thanks for watching Canadian Justice, and remember, keep examining and know that you are part of the solution.